I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. Federal Reserve Governor Jerome Powell is one step closer toward becoming chairman of the central bank. The Senate Banking Committee has approved Powell's nomination. Only Senator Elizabeth Warren voted against him. Powell's nomination now goes to the full Senate. Puerto Rico is at risk of not receiving federal community disaster loans because its cash balances may be too high. The Federal Emergency Management Agency says it will not provide additional recovery aid until the territory's funds fall below a certain level. Local officials had predicted the government would run out of money in late October due to Hurricane Maria's economic toll. Haiti has been removed from the list of countries eligible to participate in 2 temporary work visa programs. The Department of Homeland Security today released a notice saying Haitians who apply for H-2A and H-2B visas have shown, quote, high levels of fraud and abuse and a tendency to overstay their visas. And Rupert Murdoch is said to have been hospitalized after suffering a serious back injury earlier this month. According to Vanity Fair magazine, the media mogul was vacationing on his son's yacht at the time. Murdoch is recuperating in an LA hospital. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg.
And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, big tech's back on Capitol Hill. This time it is all about fighting online extremism. Did lawmakers get the answers they were after? Plus, a cryptocurrency crunch. Bitcoin falls below $10,000. Has the bubble burst? And it's a payday for Apple employees thanks to the new U.S. tax law. This is Apple brings home hundreds of billions of dollars in overseas cash to the United States. We have the story. But first, to our lead. Representatives from Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter were on Capitol Hill once again, this time to testify about how they're all fighting online extremism. They appeared along with a former FBI agent before the Senate Commerce Committee, and a lot of the same topics that came up during last year's hearings on Russian interference in the U.S. presidential election reared their heads once again. But perhaps the most dire warning for big tech came from Senator Jon Tester of Montana.
This is a really important issue. I just want to say this is a really important issue from a terrorist standpoint, from all the questions that were asked before. But our democracy is at risk here. We've got to figure out how to get this done and get it done right and get it done very quickly. Or we may not have a democracy to have you guys up to hear you out.
I want to bring in Bloomberg Tech Selena Wang, who covers this story for Bloomberg, as well as Tara Mahler, Senior Policy Advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project, who was there in person today. So, Tara, curious, what was your impression today, the general sentiment among lawmakers towards these tech companies and how the executives responded?
I thought you heard solid questions from both Democrats and Republicans. I thought you heard the tech companies pretty much on the defensive, making a lot of the claims that they've been making, which is that they've made some incremental improvements. But I thought that you heard that there were some gaps, and lawmakers were pressing them, and Clint Watts also speaking to the terrorist use of the platform, Russia propaganda on the platform, and a wide range of issues related to a wide range of nefarious actors on these platforms. At the end of the day, I think the general takeaway from the hearing was that while there have been some incremental measures taken by the tech companies in response to pressure from Capitol Hill and organizations like my own Counter-Extremism Project, there's still a lot more that needs to be done, both on the terrorist front and in terms of other actors interfering, for example, in the midterm elections. That came up in the hearing as well. So it's not just terrorists. Child sex trafficking has been an issue. And I think you're going to see them need to step up. There was a lot of questioning about the resource allocation towards these issues. Why aren't there more dollars? Why aren't there more people? They've ramped it up, but given the size of these companies, there's still more they could be doing. And also, one last thing, a lot of the companies were talking about how they were taking down content quicker and faster, problematic content. But that still begs the question as to why, once something is prohibited, why is it even allowed to be uploaded again in the first place? Why aren't they preventing it at upload? Something that we've been pushing them to do, something that they do on child pornography. There have been bomb-making videos that have resurfaced 11 or if not more times that have inspired attacks like the Manchester bombing and others, which our organization is still finding up on those platforms and which is also was cited by Senator Thune at the hearing today.
Right, you're talking about the Manchester bombing, how too that seems to keep popping up on YouTube. Selena, how did the tech executives respond? And tell us who they are.
They were certainly on the defensive. We had the public policy leads again. And again, these lawmakers are probably wondering, why don't they have the executives? Why don't they have Mark Zuckerberg? Why don't they have Jack Dorsey up there on the stand? Again, they were having to respond to questions not just about terrorism, but also about the Russian manipulation. And again, the lawmakers were asking, why are these rich and powerful companies not allocating enough to this issue? And there were several tense exchanges, one of them particularly between the Hawaiian senator and Twitter. He was asking them why, if they put so many resources to this, why are there still so many Russian bot accounts, fake accounts, and even recent incidences like the Roy Moore campaign gaining thousands of Russian followers. So take a listen here to what he had to say to Twitter.
Based on results, you're not where you need to be for us to be reassured that you're securing our democracy, and to the degree and extent that elected officials and people who vote and our adversaries are participating in your platform. How can we know that you're going to get this right and before the midterms?
Now, for its part, Twitter said that it is going to be verifying the candidates in the upcoming midterm elections, but still the bottom line from lawmakers is this is not enough.
So, Tara, I know you guys look very closely at the ongoing problems with moderation. What are some longer-term solutions? What would be a more constructive way to keep these videos off the site, to keep these bots from being able to wreak havoc?
Sure. You actually touched on some of it in your question there. So there are a few issues here. One, you can prevent some of these videos from being uploaded. Once they've been marked and flagged as being problematic, there's technology that exists that could flag it into a database and prevent uploads. So the bomb-making video, for example, that we keep seeing resurfacing, which was cited in the hearing today, if that had been flagged into a database and technology can be used to prevent upload as opposed to scan and find it once it is already up there, that would prevent some of this content from getting up there in a continuous loop, in a cat and mouse or a whack-a-mole type problem, which you keep hearing referred to for a lot of this content. The second thing you referenced was bots. There's a lot of issues in terms of account authentication, verification, and whether or not there's a human behind a particular account, how many accounts can be linked to a certain email. These are all policy changes that if Twitter wants to take action on, they can. There have been different numbers cited in terms of what percentage of accounts are bots. This was an issue that came up during the hearing. They said 5%. I've seen higher numbers cited in different reports. Again, who really knows? But the bottom line is they can crack down on it if they want to. And then lastly, transparency. I mean, you did hear them cite some figures today, but the tech companies have not really been as transparent in terms of how they're removing this content, the numbers. It's all, great to hear how much was taken down in a particular week or how quickly, but if it's going back up at a faster rate or if it's all back up there a week or an hour or days later, that's not really a sustainable solution. So more transparency, better account authentication measures, prevention of this content at upload, and then I guess lastly, more resources can be devoted to this issue. At the end of the day, these are huge companies with a lot of money, and if the public gets aggravated enough with these issues and there's enough pressure, you're going to see this hurt their bottom line. So it should be smart business for them to start putting more dollars towards the problem to back up the rhetoric.
Selena, this is a continuation of hearings from last year. What is next?
Well, they still have to update them not only on the terrorism aspect, but the Russian manipulation part. Now, Twitter came out with a pretty big announcement that they're going to try and notify accounts that may have seen IRA Russian-backed linked accounts. And that's a pretty big deal because they had been slammed for not being more transparent about who may have been targeted. And this is something that Facebook months before already said they would try to do. Now, Google, for its part, has not come out with any sort of indication of this, and senators said that they were disappointed in Google's response. Now, we're still waiting for Twitter's Transparency Center. Apparently, it's on the way. And then in terms of the terrorism realm, these companies say that they've already been collaborating for quite some time to try to come up with a shared database of hashes and digital fingerprints so that they can collaborate and more quickly catch these videos that Tara was talking about. But still, they cite some pretty significant numbers that they are catching 99, 98% of this sort of content before it's even been flagged. Google said that it has 10,000 people dedicated to this issue. Facebook wants to up that from 10 to 20,000 people looking at this. But the issue is still that there are still so many incidences where these videos are still being uploaded and re-uploaded. So until these lawmakers can see that this is stopping, the question is that there still needs to be much more to be done.
All right, Selena Wang, Bloomberg Tech, who covers Twitter for us and Facebook. Tara Mahler, Senior Policy Advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project. Thank you, Tara, for all of your input. Well, while the senators looked for answers on how to fix social media, one of Mark Zuckerberg's mentors and early Facebook investor Roger McNamee shared his ideas on what to be done. Take a listen to a bit from our upcoming Bloomberg Studio 1.0 interview with McNamee.
Not only is it not enough, it's completely irrelevant. So you cannot fix this damage after the fact with people policing it. These things are embedded in the algorithms. The same thing that makes Facebook the most compelling ad platform for rock and roll bands and consumer products companies and financial services companies makes it the perfect platform for bad actors to abuse people. You only can fix this problem by fixing the algorithms.
How so?
Well, you essentially have to change the business model. You have to make it so that anger and fear are not the predominant ways that people are motivated to act on Facebook. Again, without advertising, if you're not dependent on advertising or not as dependent on advertising, you don't need people to be addicted. You don't need to make them angry. You don't need to make them fearful.
So if they don't make money on ads, then how do they make money?
I'm saying I want to pay them a subscription. I mean, I want to pay them $10 a month. I want to pay them more than twice what they're making from me today. And I'm looking at this and saying, hey, name the price. My point is, you want to still have ads for some people? Fine. But give me the option of having a different thing. I'm saying what they're doing now is the lazy way out. These people are smarter and better than that.
You can catch more of McNamee's thoughts on fixing Facebook and much more in our full Bloomberg Studio 1.0 interview that airs later this month. Coming up, Apple plans to bring back billions. All of the details on the tech titans' repatriated cash next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg News is reporting that Apple will return hundreds of billions of dollars in overseas cash to the United States. In a statement out Wednesday, the company says it'll pay $38 billion in repatriation tax. Apple also plans on investing tens of billions on domestic jobs, manufacturing, and data centers in the coming years, and give employees a $2,500 bonus after the new tax law. Joining us now for more on Apple's latest announcement, Bloomberg Tech's Alex Webb, who covers all things Apple. So, how will they spend this $30 billion?
Well, they've said they'll spend the $30 billion in the US on a new campus, which will be for technical support. They've already got one of these in Austin. It's clearly not something that's very easy to do in, say, China. So it's a sort of job that has to be done in the US, you know, for telephone calls and that sort of thing.
So how many jobs might that create?
They've said they'll create as many as 20,000 jobs. That's clearly quite good news from a political perspective. But at that, given they have 84,000 employees already, it's quite a big bump. But one caveat, that's over 5 years.
Okay, so, you know, what else does this mean?
The thing that's kind of interesting, actually, if you really look at the numbers, the big number that they want everybody to talk about is they're going to spend $350 billion in the US over the next 5 years. The odds are they were going to spend most of that money already. The new money is the $38 billion for the tax bill and $30 billion to spend on the US. Now, if you subtract that from the $252 billion they have offshore at the moment, they've still got a huge pile of cash, and that's what shareholders are going to be really excited about in terms of buybacks and dividends. Right.
So what happens to the rest of that cash that currently remains overseas?
So basically, there are three ways they can use it.
Yes.
Buyback, still shareholder returns, M&A, and repayment of debt. They've got over $100 billion in debt. Does Apple have a track record of spending a lot of money on M&A? No. Could they have probably spent big on M&A by raising debt? Almost definitely yes. So I think, broadly speaking, the expectation is that a lot of this money goes back to shareholders.
Well, you know, what is the indication on the M&A strategy? Obviously, we know the biggest company they've ever bought is Beats. That was a $3 billion acquisition. We've seen them make some moves in music streaming. They bought Shazam. do we think they are leaning towards making more acquisitions? And if so, what kind?
I mean, I did a piece about this a little while ago. Generally, the sense within Apple is they're quite risk averse. They've looked at people like Microsoft, who did a massive deal to acquire Nokia a few years ago and had to write down almost the whole thing. So Apple also has the sense that, well, we've got a lot of money. We can use that money to spend on R&D, and anything that other people might be able to do, we can do internally. There's a sense maybe that things they're interested in are content, because they want to build out that services business, and semiconductors, chips. We know they expressed an interest in acquiring Imagination Technology as a chip maker, for instance. And so there are certain moves they've made which indicate that's an area of interest.
How does this position Apple with respect to, the wider climate and what's happening with the administration?
Well, it's interesting. There's not been any response from Trump just yet, which, well, we'll be waiting for that. But I'm sure that he will jump on this as a sort of way of underscoring what he has posited. His huge campaign pledge was bring more jobs back to the US. Apple, of course, employs millions of, well, several 100,000 people at least in China indirectly through its supply chain. And so the fact they're bringing jobs here is a kind of a plus point in the political ledger book.
All right. Alex Webb, who covers Apple for us, thank you so much for that update. Sticking with Apple, analysts who cover Apple can't agree on the fate of the company. On the same day, an analyst from Sean Harrison downgraded the stock to neutral. Bank of America Merrill Lynch raised his target to 220. That's a new street high target for the company. Shares closing up over 1%. Coming up, Bitcoin's plunge continues, tumbling below $10,000. What is weighing down the largest cryptocurrency? That is next. This is Bloomberg. A story we are watching. Broadcom says it's under investigation by U.S. antitrust officials for potentially anti-competitive conduct. The chip maker says the probe by the Federal Trade Commission is, quote, immaterial to its business. Broadcom is one of the biggest component providers for smartphones, including Apple's iPhone. The company has also made a $105 billion hostile bid to buy rival Qualcomm. Bitcoin continues to tumble, this time below $10,000, bringing its loss to almost 50% from a record set only a month ago. The sell-off this week brings more trauma to a digital coin market that has lost more than $300 billion in value in just 4 days. It also comes after a dizzying rally that pushed Bitcoin higher by 1,400% last year. Joining us now, Spencer Bogart, partner at Blockchain Capital. Spencer, great to have you back on the show. So, put this into context for us. What is happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different ways to frame this. One is just what you said, that the market's down 50% from its all-time highs. And the other way to frame this is that it's up 1,000% over the past year, right? So when we talk about a correction here, really all we've done is gone back to the all-time highs that we set only 6 weeks ago. So it hasn't been much of a correction yet, at least not in comparison to some historical corrections.
I want you to take a look at a chart, G#BTV7721, which shows some perspective on Bitcoin slide. So you see the run up, as you pointed out, and you also see the fall. Where do you think this is going? I mean, are we coming back to earth? Is this reality?
Yeah, I think there's really two different sides of the story here. So first, there's the Bitcoin side, right? And I think if we try and think about what's going on in the market today, it really makes sense in the context of there was a lot of speculative activity leading up to the launch of these derivatives and futures products that should lead to the institutionalization of Bitcoin. And so I think that that was kind of a sell the news type of event, and some of those speculators that piled in beforehand exited their positions, driving price a bit lower. Now, that said, some people were expecting these institutions to enter the market and come bulging out of the gate. And in reality, institutions move in a scale more of years, not weeks or days, right? So I still think that that story is going to materialize and it will push Bitcoin higher, but it might take a couple months.
So do you think we're in a Bitcoin bubble, or that a Bitcoin bubble is popping right now?
You know, I don't think that we're in a Bitcoin bubble over the next 3 years. I mean, if price goes lower from here, then certainly we will call it a bubble, right? We'll look at the all-time highs over 20,000, and we'll look at it being lower, and we'll say that it was a bubble. But I think that if we look and we see it higher 3 years from now, we'll say that it wasn't really much of a bubble.
Now, you invest in blockchain-focused companies. So how is this impacting the investing landscape? What's coming across your desk, and how enthusiastic Or is it changing your level of enthusiasm?
Yeah, so we're a venture firm overall, so we have really long duration in all of our positions. So it's not affecting us a lot. We can be really patient with this market. So we had actually already taken a little bit of money off the table, and we're holding a little bit of dry powder. So as the market goes down, we can always buy back into some of the positions that we really like and at cheaper prices. And we'll certainly do that when the time's right.
So what kind of positions do you like right now? What are you optimistic about?
You know what? Whenever the market's going down, I certainly like Bitcoin. It's the most resilient out of all the crypto assets that are out there. And a lot of times when you see a down market in these assets, it doesn't rotate all the way back to USD, to fiat currency. A lot of it stays trapped in the ecosystem, and their flight to safety is actually Bitcoin. So while most investors consider Bitcoin to be very far out in the risk spectrum, within the crypto community, this is viewed as the safe haven.
What about some of the smaller assets? What are you most excited about? What is the next Bitcoin?
Yeah. Well, for one, I think that some of the smaller assets could have a lot further to go down. I mean, a lot of these coins are valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, and they haven't released any kind of a product yet. And how do we explain those kind of valuations and those kind of price moves?
You can't.
I think that overall, well, I think we can actually. I think that largely it's because seed stage investing, early stage investing has been romanticized a lot over the past couple decades. People hear about these stories of people being a seed investor in an Uber. And that's an opportunity that most investors have not had access to. All of a sudden in the crypto market, these ICOs have created a new opportunity for retail investors to participate for the first time. And how did they react to that? They were like kids in a candy store, right? Going wild. And I think that now a lot of those people are learning the hard lesson, which is that with early stage investing, failure rates are very, very high. And we're seeing the flip side of that coin.
So I'm curious, in your job, are you waking up every morning and checking the price and going, or yes? I mean, is that, is it that sort of volatile,
Look,
in your own workplace?
It is. I mean, we're definitely watching it. We're not so emotionally tied to it because we are very long-term investors. The day-to-day moves really don't matter that much to us. But that said, I think
this is a big move in a matter of weeks.
It is a big move, and I think that overall it's healthy for the ecosystem. Forest fires are healthy for the long-term sustainable growth of an ecosystem, and I think that's what we're seeing here. A lot of people rushed in over the past 3 months because they thought there was easy money in this market. There was free money, and they underestimated the risk involved. And I think this is actually a healthy reminder, if not a painful lesson, about the level of risk involved in these markets.
All right, Spencer Bocart, Blockchain Capital Partner. Thanks so much for sharing the ins and outs and the roller coasters happening on the inside. Thank you. Coming up, Facebook had a lot to answer for on Capitol Hill Wednesday, but our next guest still thinks it still has much more to come clean about. That is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, you can check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. Republican lawmakers are betting that Democrats won't risk forcing a government shutdown during an election year to press their demand for a deal on immigration reform. Friday marks the deadline for a short-term spending bill agreement, while House Speaker Paul Ryan told reporters earlier today that a long-term solution on undocumented immigrants must be reached by March 5th. Libyan Coast Guard officials said they rescued 245 migrants of different African nationalities today. An official said the operation managed to save everyone on board 2 boats in distress off the coast of Libya. The people were sent to Tripoli Naval Base, where they were receiving humanitarian and medical assistance. President Trump believes Russia is helping North Korea get around international sanctions. In an interview with Reuters, the president said Russia appears to be filling in the gaps left by the Chinese in restricting oil and coal supplies to Pyongyang. The rival Koreas have agreed to form a first unified Olympic team and have their athletes parade together for the first time in 11 years during the opening ceremony at next month's Winter Olympics in South Korea. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg. Just after 5:30 in the evening here in Washington, 6:30 in the morning in Hong Kong. We are joined by Bloomberg's Sophie Kamarudin with a look at the markets. Well, Sophie, it was certainly a blockbuster session on Wall Street here. Anxious to see if you have follow-through in Asia.
Yeah, we're hoping we can take that baton and run with it. And we do have a busy day set up in Asia that could drive sentiment as well. And ahead of that, we have futures in Japan, Australia, and Korea pointing higher. Now, this Thursday, we are waiting on policy decisions from South Korea as well as Indonesia, both expected to stand pat, and a data deluge that is forthcoming from China, chief among them fourth quarter GDP. Plus, this morning, we learned that China's holdings of U.S. debt fell to a 4-month low. Now, let's check on currencies as the dollar is gaining ground. You have the Australian dollar slightly weaker, but trading near a 4-month high ahead of employment data. The yen back above 111 a dollar, and the offshore yuan that is sticking near a 2-year high as volatility picks up. And Bitcoin's wild ride continues amid regulatory concerns, back above 11,000 after sinking below 10K for the first time in 6 weeks. In Hong Kong, I'm Sophie Kamarudin. Up next, more with Bloomberg Technology.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Back to our top story. Wednesday Senate hearing on fighting online extremism. Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter all feeling the heat from lawmakers. Facebook's head of product policy and counterterrorism touted the media giant's efforts. Take a listen.
We now have more than 7,500 people who are working to review terror content and other potential violations. We have 180 people who are focused specifically on countering terrorism.
Now, Facebook's efforts against online extremism aren't the only things the company is having to defend lately. The very nature of their business is being questioned. Our next guest called them, quote, a living, breathing crime scene for what happened in the 2016 election. Tristan Harris is a former design ethicist for Google and has been called the closest thing Silicon Valley has to a conscience by The Atlantic magazine. He joins us now here in the studio. Tristan, great to have you here on the show. So what did you hear today that makes you think things are any worse or better than perhaps you would have thought?
Well, I think no matter what these companies want to say that they do, they've unleashed Pandora's box. They have 5 million advertisers, Facebook has, cycling through the network every single day. There's no way to check what 5 million advertisers, how they get matched at hyper micro targeted, characteristics to each individual user. There's billions of channels basically on the new TV, and there's no way to basically know or be accountable to all of that complexity. So they've unleashed this civilization scale mind control machine that they don't even know what thoughts it's pushing into 2 billion people's minds. As Roger likes to say, 2 billion people use Facebook. That's more than the number of followers of Christianity. 1.5 billion people use YouTube. That's more than the number of followers of Islam. And these products have that much daily influence over that many people's thoughts.
It certainly is massive. What do you think of the changes Facebook recently announced about focusing more on friends and content from family in the newsfeed as opposed to news?
Well, it's a step in the right direction, and Zuckerberg titled his post when he said that as "We are embracing time well spent as the future of the direction of the company," both in his recent post and also in the recent earnings call. That concept came from myself and my colleague Joe Edelman. We've been incubating the concept of time well spent and calling out the problems of a time spent based economy for the last 5 years. So I think it's great that they're embracing the concept, but the real challenge is it goes against the advertising based business model. You can't ask someone whose entire stock price has been dependent on telling Wall Street that we have this many minutes of people's days. It's just a multiplication. This many minutes times the average ad rates and you get the revenue, right? So if they're going to say we're going to cut down on how much time people spend, I mean, they can do a tiny bit, but not that much. And so the real question is, are they willing to examine the business model?
You've called Facebook a living, breathing crime scene for what happened in the 2016 election. That is a a bold claim.
Yep.
What do you mean?
Well, the point is that no one actually has access to what happened in the election. Only Facebook has that data. And so now the question becomes, so can we trust Facebook with telling us the truth? Well, if you look back at what they've said since literally a year ago, when first Mark Zuckerberg said it's a crazy idea that fake news had any impact on the election, and then them continuing to withhold and delay and defer the release of information, first saying, oh, it was $100,000 in ads, but then as Roger and I and many other, there's a lot of researchers like Renee Diresta and others at Data for Democracy that did lots of background research, finding that the Russia campaign influenced 150 million people. And Facebook did not admit that until the day of the November 1st hearings. So if they're telling us that we should trust them to self-regulate, they've not really won our trust. And so in that way, it's a living, breathing crime scene.
Now, you first started calling attention to this when you were at Google.
That's right.
You worked there from 2012 to 2016, and you wrote the first Google memo, and you sent something within the company. What were you raising alarm bells about, and what was the response?
Well, basically what I said in this memo in 2013 was, I was a product manager. I was actually feeling kind of frustrated that I didn't think we were taking our responsibility seriously, and I made a presentation, basically said, never before in history have 50 engineers, 20 to 30 years old, living in San Francisco, where we are right now, influenced what 1 billion people are thinking and doing with their time and their attention. And we've enabled this channel that's exploiting people's cognitive biases. We're exploiting people's psychology. And we as Google, not as small little startups that are going to fix the problem, but Google and other large technology companies have a moral responsibility in addressing this problem. And the presentation went viral. It spread to 20,000 people. It became the #1 meme in the internal culture tracking system, and I had a talk with Larry, and I ended up working on this topic ever since 2013. And it was way before all this stuff about fake news and elections and everything else. It was just an awareness that these technology companies have a larger influence on culture, elections, children's development than almost any other political actor. And so, how do we start to have that conversation and actually ethically manipulate or be careful about how we're steering 2 billion people's thoughts?
How did Larry respond?
I think across the company there is a real seriousness in taking to heart the message that people take. I think Google's actually a very ethical company. They really do have good intentions. And the real elephant in the room is the business model. The advertising-based business model means all of these attention-based companies, so YouTube, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, are all in the business of capturing people's attention. And YouTube's stated goals were how do we get billions of hours watching on this product for as long as possible.
Did he acknowledge that? I mean, did he share your views or sympathize with your views?
I don't recall specifically in the meeting with Larry, but I mean, I think that it's never. The conversation likes to get avoided because it's an uncomfortable thing to look at. Usually it's sort of an innocuous thing. I mean, I remember the Chrome web browser started measuring how much time people spend in the web browser because they just wanted to know how much time are people spending on the web versus in apps. It's a useful thing to know. But as soon as you start measuring how much time people spend in the web browser, suddenly all these young 20-year-olds start going to work and trying to maximize how much time people spend on the web. And so, you manage what you measure. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we actually care about? Should these products be designed for addiction, which is what they're designed for now? And this has huge public health consequences for children.
What are those consequences?
Well,
we had Jim Steyer of Common Sense Media on the show yesterday, and there really isn't a lot of research on how tech impacts children, shockingly, given that there's so much concern about it, but we actually don't know.
Well, there's a great article by Jean Twenge that got a lot of traction called Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation? And it talks about many of the cultural and social impacts of how addiction to smartphones have changed our relationship, changed children's relationship and the children's dynamics. When are they having sex? When are they going out? People are more isolated, more depressed. And if you just look at the dynamics, Snapchat, for example, puts the number of days in a row that you sent a message as a kid to all of your friends. And they're inventing this number. It's a persuasive, manipulative design technique to keep 2 kids on the hook, to keep this ball getting tossed back and forth every day. If they stop throwing the ball back and forth, they lose the number. And so kids start defining the currency of their friendship based on whether they're sending this empty message back and forth. And so you have literally, Snapchat's the #1 way for teenagers in the US to communicate. So you have 100 million teenagers that are basically out there throwing empty messages back and forth. Is any of this designed to help us, or is this just to addict us?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Jean's article in The Atlantic, because I remember reading that, and also remember there really was no stand taken. is fairly, in my opinion, fairly neutral.
Yeah.
In part, I think, because we don't have a lot of the answers here.
Well, I think what we can know is the motivations. If you look at what do thousands of engineers at Facebook go to work to do every day? Do thousands of people wake up and say, gosh, how can we strengthen the public square? No. Thousands of people go to work asked to drive up one number, which is how much are people engaging with and increasing the time they spend on these services. I want to live in a world where the tech industry is actually about helping humanity, and there's a lot of ways they can do that. And so we started this nonprofit, Time Well Spent, that's basically about changing and realigning technology with human values and what technology is supposed to be for. Why in the world would we not have it be that way?
Have you heard from Facebook? Have you heard from Mark or Cheryl or Google?
I've had lots of conversations, and there's people in the industry are my friends. My friends started Instagram. I think there's a reluctance, there has been a reluctance to admit the extent of and scope of the problem and that the business model is the problem. And I think there's a lot of good intentions, but until we get clear that the business model of advertising is fundamentally misaligned with democracy. If the business model is I have to capture your attention, that means it's better for me to confirm your worldview and give you things that agree with what you're thinking than to show you things that disagree. I'll do worse in the attention economy if I show that reality is more complicated or different than how you think it is.
Does a subscription model for Facebook eliminate all these conflicts?
Well, certainly it would change who the customer is. If all of us are paying for the product, then you have thousands of engineers who go to work every day, and who are they working for? They're working for us, for people who pay.
What about the people who can't afford the subscription?
So this is really
interesting. The idea is to
interesting.
really level the world's playing field.
That's right, and that's what they'll say. So do you want to introduce an inequality in the system where only some people can afford to pay? And I think the challenge is actually that the advertising business model has indebted us to a whole bunch of cultural externalities. So we have to ask, how much do those cultural externalities actually cost us? How much does it cost us in terms of extra data plan usage? For example, is the free business model really free? If you add up all of the costs to society and to our data plans and all this other stuff, I mean, half of the stuff that we download on our phones is probably ads. So if you just cut that out and you actually had all these people, I mean, we would save a lot of money as consumers as well. And I think we have to figure out what is that price point and what are we willing to pay for? Because we can't really afford it. The reason Roger and I are doing this, Roger McNamee was Zuckerberg's mentor, and we actually met on this show.
I know you and Roger met here,
yeah.
And it started this big project.
Yeah.
This crusade.
Yeah, and I think we have to get clear on what will it cost us. I mean, the reason that he and I are doing this work and we're not really paid for it or anything like that is because we don't think we can actually survive or afford to live on this model as is. We can't just keep plowing down this road.
How do you think the danger, if you will, that you believe Facebook presents compares to what Google or Apple or Twitter presents?
Well, the thing about Facebook is it's the product that just reaches the most number of people. It is the primary surface area for disinformation campaigns, for bad actors to manipulate the public. It's the scale of Facebook that makes it the predominant I think, source of the problem. But obviously, YouTube and Twitter are also influential actors. Twitter influencing more of the media, YouTube influencing political beliefs and radicalizing people with more and more conspiracy theories. But I do think that Facebook is the one that deserves the most scrutiny, just because of the influence, whether they want to or not. It's hard for them to make any action that we're going to be happy about, because they have just so much influence that anything they do will negatively and positively affect a lot of number of people. But that's what I mean by Pandora's box. I mean, they have now unleashed this machine that's automatedly throwing thoughts into 2 billion people's minds, and it's doing this in Indonesia and in Bali and in Burma, and it's creating genocides in certain cultures around the world. And the engineers at the company don't even necessarily speak the language of the places where it's impacting politics or culture. At least here we have a free press. We can talk about fake news. We can talk about some of these issues. Imagine in countries like Burma, where they just got the internet overnight. Now Facebook is the #1 way people communicate, and there's a genocide, and the Rohingya are actually crossing over the border into Bangladesh. So, they've unleashed this thing, and now we have to get really serious about what would it mean to try and protect the public square, not just here in the West, but around the world.
So what are you doing, aside from speaking to the media? How do you think you're going to make this change happen?
Well, so the first thing is creating a cultural awakening. I think people don't even think to question their relationship with technology, whether it's on our team. And so the first thing is just going out there and making sure that people understand this misalignment of incentives. So we did that with 60 Minutes and with TED and things like this. The second is engaging employees, because I really think that actually the employees at these companies not feeling satisfied with their leadership, not taking these issues seriously, is going to be the #1 driver for change. If you look at the Delete Uber campaign, the Delete Uber campaign didn't kill Uber's business metrics, didn't kill their revenue, but it totally changed the culture. There was a shunning effect. No one wanted to work at Uber after this Delete Uber campaign happened. There was a huge exodus of employees, and they had to change their practices. So I think the same thing is going to happen with Facebook. I mean, it's going to be really hard to attract and retain the best people in the world if you're not taking these concerns seriously.
It's made a lot of people very rich.
It has, and I think a lot of those people...
It's hard to walk away from.
It is hard to walk away from, and what Roger and I have found is that there's actually a lot of people who are ex-alumni from Facebook who did make a lot of money, and they actually agree with Roger and I. They agree, because it's not an opinion, it's just the truth. But it is hard to come out against the source of what funded you. Look at Chamath, who's VP of Growth at Facebook, said, hey, we built a mind control machine. And Sean Parker said the same thing. I can't believe what we're doing to children. But I think more and more voices are going to start to come out because they have to feel like it's safe to do so.
All right, Tristan Harris, former design ethicist at Google, now on this new crusade. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Great to have you. Sticking with Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg says he is optimistic about a DACA fix. The Facebook founder and CEO saying in a Facebook post that he's been calling members of Congress. He added that he believes they want to fix this, but, quote, we need to keep the pressure on so they know we will hold them accountable. Coming up, the fate of net neutrality. Tech execs urging regulators as several lawsuits to protect the internet regulations are filed. We will speak with one company that's petitioned the courts next. This is Bloomberg. Facebook, Twitter, and Google's YouTube told lawmakers that they support a legislative effort to restore net neutrality rules. This as the legal fight against the Federal Communications Commission's recent repeal of those regulations heats up. Various lawsuits have been filed, including one on behalf of 21 state attorney generals and several consumer protection groups like Free Press and Public Knowledge, and one by the company Mozilla. Joining us now, Chief Business and Legal Officer for Mozilla, Danelle Dixon, who wrote the blog post about this lawsuit. What does Mozilla want to achieve here?
Well, from the standpoint of Mozilla and our mission, the notion is protecting the open internet as a global resource accessible to all. So we'd like to be able to reinstate those open internet principles that we've all worked and lived under since the inception of the internet, and to get that so that we can get all of us as consumers to have this global resource available to us.
Now, others have complained about the rules being rolled back, but in some ways it's a wonder we haven't seen stronger action from some of the tech giants. Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, saying recently that net neutrality is still important, but it is not their priority right now. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't know if that was taken out of context, but the notion is I think that most of the tech companies support usually through alliances. That's why it was really important to us to make a statement as a plaintiff in this, as a petitioner, so that we can actually help to control the litigation. We really wanted to be a party here.
So you say that ending net neutrality as we know it could end the internet as we know it. Why would that be such a bad thing? The internet isn't perfect. We were just had a very long conversation about how the internet isn't perfect.
Yeah, the internet's not perfect, but the notion of the internet and the way that it was set up is that we all had access to whatever information we want. I don't want to be alarmist, but think about a world where, think about politics and what if an ISP just believed a certain way with respect to a specific political issue, and they blocked or they throttled all content regarding the other side of that issue so no one could get access to it. It really could impact not just the way people think, but it could impact our democracy. It could impact the way that the global world sees the U.S. as well. This is an issue, and the internet is an issue that no one country should regulate, and certainly no private entity should determine what content you get access to in your home.
So how should we watch this play out? What are next steps?
Well, the litigation will continue, and we have to see how that plays out. This is a longer process when you're in litigation. We see lots of legislative action right now. There's a CRA, there's votes in Congress to try to repeal and to try to roll back those orders. And we could see legislators themselves writing legislation to be able to formally codify the open internet principles.
So are you working with or speaking to other organizations that are considering filing lawsuits of their own?
Oh, we've spoken with lots of our allies and lots of colleagues of ours outside that believe very strongly in this and have already joined. Some of them have joined. Some of them have said they're going to be interveners in the litigation. So there's a lot of folks out there that care about this issue and are going to fight just like we are.
All right, Danelle Dixon, Chief Legal Officer for Mozilla, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be watching. We are also going to hear from California Attorney General Xavier Becerra tomorrow on the show about the case to keep net neutrality. Coming up, another tech company said to be exploring a possible public offering in 2018. Details on that next. And a feature I want to bring to your attention, our interactive TV function. Check it out at TV Go on the Bloomberg terminal. You can watch us live. If you miss an interview, you can go back to it. You can send our producers a message or play along with the charts that we show you on air. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg. A story we are watching, SurveyMonkey is said to be accelerating conversations with bankers to go public later this year. Now, that's according to Recode. The company is expected to be closely watching how other tech companies fare in the market. Other Recode sources add that SurveyMonkey is considering making a last-minute bolt-on acquisition of another company in this space to enhance value. And the Weinstein Company could have a bidder in Miramax, which was founded by brothers Harvey and Bob Weinstein. Miramax is now owned by Qatar-based Be-In Media Group. A merger would combine the two studios' film libraries and could allow the brothers to keep a role in the business. Weinstein Company has been seeking a buyer since the October dismissal of Harvey Weinstein due to sexual assault allegations. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder that we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.